There you go. All good. Look at that. Look
Pretty
at
good,
that.
right? Just in case people forget who they're talking.
No. Look at that. At which point I would then also show you the book that has tickled me the most, which is a French translation of a book which has no words to it, which is just tickles the crap out of me. Step by bloody step. Okay, first things first. Welcome along to Thought Bubble 22. This is Si Spurrier. Hello there, sir.
Hello.
Yes, step by bloody step. My God.
Yeah.
Every single time that I think you kind of peak a bit, and then you go and do something like that, which just
sort of. I feel like
amazing.
We've said this before. One of the privileges of being a writer is that you can do so many jobs. You know, in the time that a good artist would take to do an issue, I can probably do 3.
Sure.
So it would just
it's still
be
a bold concept, still a bold
but I've got the privilege of doing it. I can do a superhero book, I can do an indie book where I get to use language the way that I will, if allowed, which is to use 6 words when one would do. And so it felt like, well, it's not as simple as challenging myself, if I'm honest. There's also the question of when you have collaborated with somebody like Matthias Bergara,
Sure.
It's only a matter of time before some other arsehole swoops down and takes him away from me.
Yeah.
And I know that he's the sort of brilliant mind that will say yes to a job if it is delivered as a challenge.
Yeah. And so, this was a challenge.
Yeah.
This is absolutely.
So, like, our collaboration is wonderful. We have a great synergy. We're great friends. If I can turn to him and say, you know what, I'm quite a wordy writer. I have always wanted to challenge myself to tell a story silently. Can I do it? Do you think you could help me? Yeah. And of course he's like, yes, of course. And immediately we're sending sketches backwards and forwards. The central idea.
What was the planning stage for that like? I mean, how?
Well, it's because I've worked with, and this is like the bottom line to all these questions is, if I had not worked with Matthias before, and if Matthias was not Matthias, this book would not and could not have happened. You need utter trust. You need no ego. You need the perfect collaboration, and you need a genius. So from the get-go, I knew vaguely what the story was, and it's not like a ridiculously convoluted story, but despite there being no words, it is still a plot-driven story. You know, it's character.
It's still about a fair amount of moving parts involved.
Yes, it's not like some people have described it as a fable, and it definitely is that. It's sort of it is, without spoiling
for anybody who hasn't read it. Yeah,
it is there's a particular myth which springs up anthropologically in every single culture on the earth. And it's a myth that etiologically describes why a particular natural thing happens. And I'm being careful not to explain what it is because it will give it away. But I wanted to wonder what that myth would look like on an alien world, on a world that has the marks of fantastical strangeness where technology and magic and all these things are present. So yeah, that was the sort of the inception, and it needed to have the simplest emotional core. I had just become a parent, so it made perfect sense for it to be a story about a defenseless child who is utterly reliant upon something. So
I find that interesting because I will be splicing this together with the interview I did with Kieran Gillen, and he was saying about it because he did his recent Marvel event, and he was saying it wanted to be about something, and being a new parent, there was something that he wanted to tell.
It just changes your perspective, and it sort of makes you want to talk about that feeling. And you sort of, I mean, look, it's a cliche to say that having a child changes you, makes you more open. It doesn't. It just changes your perspective a little bit.
Well, I mean, the last time you and I spoke, which was at Margate, this was many moons ago, and Ben was imminent, I believe, at that point.
Yes, Emma was heavily pregnant. We've had 2.
It's been a couple of years. It's been a couple of years.
Yeah. And the funny thing, apropos step by bloody step, my productivity fell off a cliff as soon as kids started to arrive. Yeah. I'm pointing over there because my child is just out of shot.
We won't.
I slowed right down. Life is no longer your own. Mm-hmm. Any illusion of control you had over your own life is just out the window the second there are utter dependence floating around. It's gone from taking me maybe 4 days to write an issue to about 10 days to write an issue of anything. Step by Bloody Step was so different, and not just because there was no dialogue to worry about. It was just a dream. It didn't feel like work. Every page was a conversation with Matthias. And at the centre of it, all the way through, is this idea of how does it feel to be defenceless and to depend on something? How does it feel to be the protector of something defenceless? And as time changes, I'm looking ahead now on my most stressful days when my kids just won't leave me alone. I'm like, just give me some space, get out of my face. But I know the day will come very soon when they won't hug me, and it'll be crushing, because that's the horrible dynamic.
Would you say that the book is very much then your most personal work to date?
Yeah, to an extent. Every book I do is very personal.
Sure, that's
in very different ways. Some of them because there's like chit chat going on. There's a turn of phrase that will crack open my heart when I write it without realizing it was coming. But in as much as it's that wordless expression of utter devotion, which you have to be a halfway decent parent, and the expression of utter dependence that every person who has ever had parents and has been a child remembers. Yeah, it is my most personal work, and it's like a real joy to see it going down so well. It didn't have to do as well as it's done. It's such a weird thing to read. People absorb it so differently than if it had words. My suspicion is that when a person opens a normal comic, their eye jumps immediately to text. Takes in the text, pauses to either confirm or juxtapose what they've just understood from the text with the imagery that surrounds it, and then jumps on to the next panel, and on and on and on. When there is no text to allow that to happen,
it's a more direct storytelling.
It is, but it's also a challenge. So the brain, the unconscious brain, is having to say, every time it jumps into a new panel, why has the artist chosen to show me this? What is the piece of visual information which justifies this panel? And so every single panel becomes an investigation, and it's hard. I think it's all unconscious, but it's an effort, and people come out of it saying like, I loved it, but it's exhausting. And so, for instance, Matthias and I realized quite early that we had to occasionally build in big double-page spreads. We're being...
How the devil are you, sir?
Always ruining it.
We can get clashes left, right and centre here. It's amazing.
The idea is that you build in these quiet moments so that the reader can maintain the momentum of the emotion, but also can just go, and then turn the page and the adventure goes on.
Was that something that you learnt as you were building the book? That dynamic you had to kind of accept?
Yes, absolutely. Like we knew. So one of the, again, without
I was curious
spoiling,
if it was something that you knew when you were having those initial conversations. You suddenly realised it was something you were going to have to build into it, or whether it was like as the issues with.
We started out knowing that we needed to include occasional DPSs, and I had just envisaged them as being double page spreads. I had envisaged them as just being blank, and a way of showing time passing. We're marking the seasons, we're marking stages in the journey. Matthias, being Matthias, was like, no, we're not having blank pages in our book, so we'll just do an incredible landscape. And then the first time it happened, we started reading everything that we had got up to that far and realised what it was doing for us.
It's giving you
this change in pace. We're like, we have to keep doing this now. And it worked so well.
Cool.
So,
when we last talked, like I say, Margate, you were just about to launch into Salmon.
Yes, all of that stuff was coming.
And all that stuff was on the way. If you can indulge me, because we had that great chat about what you had in mind. Now it's out of the way. How was that?
Was it a dream?
Was
it a real dream?
Yeah. Was it what you were expecting?
Yes, I suppose it was. I mean, I knew going in that I was going to be working with incredible artists, and that's sort of all I can ask for. That means that if it goes wrong, it's nobody's fault but mine, and I have to step up and meet that level of quality. I probably said this to you last time. I was never the quintessential Sandman fan. So it wasn't until much more recently I discovered it and absorbed it and saw the genius. Even then, I don't have the same brain as Neil.
Yeah.
He's a genius and a wonderful person. I'm far more cynical and far less nice, basically.
You managed to weave that into the story, though, and you made it your own in that regard.
I felt like I couldn't just do a pastiche, and there would be no point just trying to do Neil 2.0. So it seemed to me the sensible thing to do would be to tell a story that occupied that space, to be respectful to it, to indulge its most wonderful whimsies, but also to introduce what an ecosystem biologist would call invasive exotics, voices from outside which are a little bit more in keeping with my own, which have the critical distance to be a bit mean about things that would otherwise be completely taken as granted. And yeah, I stand behind that work, and I'm very proud of it. There's a couple of issues that are particularly wild and that I look back on with such joy. I think we stuck the landing. That's the real trick.
That's what I was going to ask. The next thing, how do you feel it ended? How do you feel that your time with the book ended?
Well,
because it did feel. Well, we know it ended a little premature.
Well, we're talking about Hellblazer, right? So out of the dreaming of it all, then came the Hellblazer of it all, and that was like a bucket list dream come true. There was a sort of a funny moment where my editor Chris had travelled out to be with Neil, and they placed a video call to offer me this job, and I had this like 5-second volte-face where I had to say, oh my god, this is amazing, this is everything I've ever wanted. I grew up reading Hellblazer, that was always my comic, so this was like a dream come true. But in the interim, in the years before this, I had the extreme privilege of becoming quite friendly with Alan Moore. Emma and I used to go and have tea with him, and like this is not the time or the place to just rant about what a stunningly wonderful, brilliant human being he is. Inspirational in ways that, like,
I'd kill to meet the man, but I get the feeling that anything I want to talk to him about, he really doesn't want to talk about.
And that's the thing. If you go in with an agenda, then it's always going to sort of confirm whatever you suspect. But there's that. I'm digressing. I'm sorry, but there's that idea that if you spend time around stupid people, you'll get contact stupid. If you spend time around Alan, you feel clever for weeks afterwards. He's brilliant. Anyway. Hellblazer, thank you very much, that's a wonderful offer. I don't want to upset him, so I didn't ask for his permission, I didn't ask for his blessing, I didn't want to put him in a position where he would have to refuse.
Sure.
I said to him, they've offered me this, I would desperately love to do it, I would love to do it with respect to you. If you will loathe me hereafter, I won't do it. And I just got a note back from his assistant saying, Alan says this is fine. Which is by no means a blessing. I didn't want that, I didn't expect it, but it was enough to know that he understood my reasoning. It's a character that meant so much to me as a result.
And there was no hex coming in his.
Well, I mean, my life did get very unlucky for a little while after that, but no, and therefore I could.
The house still falling apart.
It is very much so. Yeah, I could launch.
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah, cheers, mate. There's a story for the pub later on. Nothing to do with Alan. It's actually. The very brief version is when I was in New Orleans meeting Neil before what turned into the Sandman universe was launched, I came into possession by misadventure of a scarred voodoo coin that had been left in a crevice in Cemetery Number 1. I brought it home with me, and anyway, blah blah blah. Yeah, I ended up having to do some like homemade magic to dispel this goddamn thing.
Oh, good.
Anyway, digression. Hellblazer got wrapped up after 12. Now, I had more.
Because I mean, from what I can gather and from what you've posted and what you've shared, you had more to say.
Yeah, but I mean, not that I was expecting to get it. It's just that if they said to me, "You've got 60 issues of Hellblazer," I wouldn't struggle to fill it. There's always going to be more because that character occupies the perfect Venn diagram that is the things I'm interested in, the way I want to talk about them, the things, the tonality that I like to adhere to, my aesthetic, all of that stuff. The sadness was that it all sort of happened in quite a rush, you know. Nobody's fault, by the way. The nature of the modern comics industry is that, especially for indie titles or non-top 10 big 2 superhero titles, if you get more than 5 or 6 issues, it's incredible and it should be celebrated. if you get to 12, everybody's like, oh, well, that just shows that it was a failure. And it doesn't. It shows that it was a massive success that nobody expected it to be. And of course, then people say, well, that's just a terrible excuse for an unhealthy industry. And yeah, maybe you're right about that. But the fact is, we told some incredible stories that we didn't expect to get the opportunity to tell. The sadness is that because of the way the economics of the whole thing are structured, and I could pin this mostly on distribution models and distribution monopolies, but let's not go there. Retailers are required to be risk averse, which means they need to invest in things that are happening very fast. They need to invest in number ones. They need to invest in long running stuff that is already familiar, that everybody already knows about. Long story short, we got like 2 months notice before having to wrap it up, and that's really difficult to wrap up whatever modular story you're trying to tell.
Especially when you were telling as big a story as you were.
So we managed it, but it was a bit of a rush, those last couple of issues. So yeah, that's to sort of leap ahead a little bit. By the way, the door is not necessarily completely closed on that. We live in hope that there might still be tricklings out there. But I sort of took a lot of that anger and energy and filed it into Damn Them All, which is the book that came out this month.
And you're just going to say what's next? What's up? What's coming up? What have you got on the plate?
Damn Them All is the biggest thing. There's lots of X-Men-y stuff coming down the pipe. There's some exciting DC stuff I'm not allowed to talk about. And then lots of indie stuff that will be announced in due course.
I understand there are people in this room that you are going to be working with, and it's going to be quite
pretty great.
It's going to be a hell of a year. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, man.
To wrap things up, I want to talk about Thought Bubble very quickly in a very short, for you, a very short sentence. If you can say what Thought Bubble means to you as possibly the last proper bastion of
comics culture
related convention.
I mean, it's a joy, it's a glory. I've been away for a few years, so this felt like a real homecoming. I've done amazingly well with my stock. People are always so friendly and talkative, like me. I hope it's around for a long time, because it really is the last show that celebrates our wonderful magical medium, rather than just the things that emanate forth from it through adaptations. So I hope it lasts forever.
Excellent stuff. Well put, well said. Thank you very much. We have been doing this interview, it's in 17 minutes on the clock. We've had people who have just gone, I want to talk to him, but he's talking to that bloke, so I'm going to let him go. Si, thank you so much.
Great pleasure. You can't shake hands, can you?
I can get there. It was a bit of, I got there.
Nice
Thank
to
you
see
so
you.
much. Take care.